Hey, if anyone wants to hear my reads live, you can totally come and visit me on Steam and chat to me on Steam. Anyways, now that I'm done advertising, this is Chapter 9 of The Ballad of Echo the Diamond Dog. Raiding the Kitchen. I warily rubbed my face with my paws, feeling anxious and oddly complacent at the same time. The room I had been given was bare and ugly, with no window, and a small flat cot resting on the ground. Aside from that, it was sparsely furnished. Nothing else in the room besides a dingy cabinet, a clock, and a mirror, probably used by the guards to examine themselves before presenting to a superior officer. It was the cot that I sat on now, my mind racing at full speed, despite the need for sleep. I checked the time. 4:57. My quarters were inside the newest building in Wethoof, the barracks. In times past this town had had no need of such occupation, much less the place to house those of its pursuit. All that had changed, however, when the recent problems with the hydras. "How many are there?" I had asked Captain Typhus as we walked through the village a few hours ago, now sleeping somewhat peacefully in the murky gloom of the night.
"Over 100. A whole nest, in fact."
His replies were always carefully worded and well thought out, despite the fact that he always responded instantly. "All fully grown?"
"No. Only a few big ones. It's the babies you want to watch out for, though. They are small enough to get through the hole in the gate, but large enough to take on several ponies at once. Doesn't help that they've all got more than one head."
Delightful. At least that explained why he was so worried about the hole. I tried to push the guilt out of my head as I sat on the cot. I'd been given the room at the end of the dormitory, which was actually quite unfilled. Wethoof had had little time to train a proper amount of guards, and as such there were a good number of other rooms of this kind sitting vacant. Typhus and, surprisingly, Gingersnap were in charge of recruitment, and while many had volunteered, few were actually capable of handling the harsh life as a guard pony. From what I had observed so far, there were roughly 30 to 35 functional ponies capable of defending the town under the command of the captain. That wasn't even a quarter of the number required. I distracted myself with a gear check. It gave me something to do, at least. My backpack was now officially retired. My run through the jungle had torn several gashes in the tough canvas, and the shoulder straps were on the verge of snapping. There was little use for it now, besides scavenging the material from some other form of my clothing. My belt had also been torn, almost completely though, and I regretted using a simple rolled-up t-shirt for the material, as it wasn't very durable at all. My sleeveless sweatshirt was in dire need of seamstress, and one of the holes my ears poked through had been expanded back down to the neck by some dangling thorn bush. And to top it off, everything was covered in a generous coating of plant guts, charred wood chips, and mud. I hadn't fared much better, either. Numerous small slashes covered my arms and legs from crashing through the dense undergrowth at high speed. Particularly nasty cut had actually torn a deep gash in my ear. I now sported a deep V-shaped gap in my right ear that made me look somewhat feral, if my scruffy appearance wasn't enough to influence that. I checked the time again. 4:58. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me!" The silence was overbearing, and I could stand it no longer. Anxious to do something, anything, I decided to at least try and make the effort of looking presentable for tomorrow. I had to make a good impression on the villagers, and while I was here, I'd rather not them regard me with such hostility. The hallway was quiet and dark, and as I silently crept out of my room, I almost felt like a naughty child sneaking downstairs after their parent fell asleep to feast on some leftover dessert, or to do a fan-fiction reading at 12 o'clock at night. My paws patted softly on the hard wood as I made my way into the central room of the barracks. This building had been clearly built for military use. Only the basics had been included. The large open chamber I walked into now made up the assembly hall as well as the dining hall, and I suspected served as a rec room as well for off-duty guards. The south wing, where I had just come from, was only a simple hallway lined with doors leading into the rooms. There was no north wing. Instead, there was only a double door leading outside. Ugh. The western wing contained the kitchens, while the eastern wing, my destination, held the bathroom and other facilities. I brought my sweatshirt, or what was left of it, with me to the communal showers. I found it somewhat strange that there was only one room for such a task, and that stallions and mares often used it at the same time. Then again, ponies don't usually wear clothes, so I attributed my unequestrian immodesty to my past life. I honestly shouldn't have been bothered by this. After all, I'd spent all my time here without any pants on. I really enjoyed the breezes, by the way, and hadn't felt self-conscious about it. At least the water is hot. Scalding almost, but I liked it that way. I lathered myself up with the suds from a dispenser and set to work giving myself a good clean. It was the first real one I'd had since I got here, and I sorely needed it. The scent of wet dog flooded the room, but was soon replaced by that warm, soapy smell, so commonly attributed to bath time. It took me a surprisingly long time to clean myself, due to all of my fur. I now held a healthily respect for all the long-haired women I'd known back on Earth. Having a luscious coat is somewhat annoying. Weirdly enough, I thought I'd heard my mother yelling at me to get behind the ears. I obliged the imaginary voice, and suddenly felt homesick. Aww. The sweatshirt got a bath, too. It was the only piece of clothing I owned that was still wearable, and I washed out as much of the dirt and plant stains as I could, before hanging it up to dry from an unused shower head. Now I had to dry off as well. Sadly, I had forgotten to find a towel of some sort. Almost as soon as I had turned the water off, my body was seized with an uncontrollable urge to move. Helpless to resist, I found myself on all fours, shaking myself off just like an earth dog. Water flew from my coat, which now shone a deep bronze brown, streaked with red, while the creamy fur on my chest and neck was spotlessly gleaming. Ha! Doing that never gets old. I wrung out my sweatshirt and whipped it a few times to get rid of the remaining water. Surprisingly, it completely dried off. I assumed this was just another quirk to the cartoon-like physics of this world. I resolved to investigate it later. In the meantime, I needed something to eat. As I made my way back across the central hall, my paw steps resounding weirdly off the walls, it feels very strange to be completely alone in such an open space that is so commonly filled up with bodies. The Western Wing's kitchen was surprisingly well stocked. A variety of foods could be found in the pantry, and from this my knowledge of equestrian culture expanded greatly. It seems that while ponies are not carnivorous, they do use some animal products, such as milk and cheese, in their foods. I found eggs as well, although I doubted they were fertilized ones. Oat-based products are apparently a staple of their diet, right up there with fruits and vegetables. I also discovered that they eat a large amount of grass and hay as well. Ponies eating grass. Didn't see that one coming. A bag of peanuts and several large cubes of salt told me that they got all the protein and salts they needed from other sources. I, however, was not a pony. I had sharp teeth, with only a few molars in the back. That meant I was technically an omnivore, although I could have consumed gems as well. However, the enticing aromas from the kitchen pressured me to consume some real food for once. And to boot, my gems had fallen out of a torn hole in my backpack. I needed high-energy diet to sustain myself, so I set about making some omelets. Don't use their shit. They're gonna get all angry at you. Be smart. Wait it out. Damn. They don't trust you. Don't steal their food. Brah. They have this whole hard thing. They're all like going through a hard time. That's why it's well stocked and shit. They probably have like portions and you're taking the wrong portion. All this stuff. I took down a wide skillet and a spatula from the hanging rack in the center of the kitchen and started up the stove. It was a large, flat-top one and seemed to be powered by electricity somehow. I made a mental note to find out where villages get their power from, because I had seen no power lines above or under the ground when I was outside. A slap of butter from a nearby stick soon began to soften and melt as the pan heated up. Satisfied with that, I began to whistle softly as I got out some ingredients from a nearby fridge. Eggs? Check. Oh, peppers. Check-a-rooney. Some tomatoes, mushrooms, onions, a little bit of cheese. Check, 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 and a little bit of check. A few leaves of basil were added to my list of ingredients as well. I had gotten hand, or paw, if you will, it to the Italians. Fresh leaves of basil really make a dish perfect. They know how to cook. So do you, apparently. Some crumbled up bacon would have perfectly made this delicious as well, but that was out of the question, so I'd just go heavy on the salt and to make up for it. Nice! A salt man. I was feeling rather hungry, and the skillet was quite wide, so I proceeded to crack half a dozen eggs into the small bowl before whipping the yolks open with the spatula. The yellow goop made a soft sizzling sound as it was poured out onto the pan. I quickly began sprinkling the ingredients on top, giving an artful pinch of this here, or a dusting of that over there. On Earth, I had lived rather meagerly. Not enough for much discomfort, but enough to know what it feels like to go hungry every once in a while. Chef Boyardee was a good friend of mine, as well as a dreaded dinner guest. As such, whenever I was given the chance to eat well, I took it with gusto. This also applied to cooking. Whenever the opportunity presented itself to create something marvelously delicious that wasn't pre-packed in plastic, I put on an imaginary chef hat and set to work. An imaginary monocle, too. Can't go wrong with those. It makes me feel pretty damn sophisticated. A chef with a monocle. A second pan soon joined the skillet on the stove, and I set about hunting for something else to cook. In a cabinet I found some good-sized potatoes. Hash browns, perhaps. I got out some salt and pepper and washed off the potatoes. I was unable to find something suitable to cut them with, so I washed my paws as well, before simply tossing all 4 spuds in the air and swiping them with my sharp claws, catching the tattered remains of the potatoes neatly in the pan. I threw some onions and the pepper and some more basil in for good measure. Then, carefully tapping the salt into the browns with one paw, I tended to my omelet with the other. But this time I was whistling a jaunty tune that really had no rhyme or reason to it. I patted down the browns with the spatula and turned around, eager for something else to do. I hunted through the cabinets again, this time happening upon a bag of flour. I set it on the counter and rummaged about the fridge for the upteenth time. A carton of milk soon joined the flour, along with some sugars and fruits. Crepes, is it crepes or crepes? Or, crepes? Pyro. Huh. Crepes sounded pretty good right now. Quick as a flash, I returned to the stove and made my adjustments to the omelet and the browns. I had actually begun a silly little jig at this point, to the whimsical tune of my whistling. I was simply happy to be doing something, rather than moping about. I danced back to the counter, and put the flour along with some eggs into a mixing bowl, and began stirring. I slowly added a little bit of milk, and then some water to thin out the batter, and tossed in some butter to thicken it out again, when I put in a little too much water. Once the batter was smooth, I took yet another pan off the rack and tossed it into the stove. I did a quick spin, followed by a few random dance steps, almost dropping the bowl I held in one paw. Smart. Another round of tending to the other foods was accomplished simultaneously as I poured out the mix into the third pan, tilting it around in a circle to coat the bottom evenly. Crepes cooked fast, and if I'd gotten my timing right, everything would be finished at the same time. Seized by a sudden giddiness, I abruptly did another spin and slid across the kitchen floor on my knees, whipping my arm around as I strummed an air guitar. I bet someone's watching, like just in the doorway. This just seems like that sort of scene. Yeah, and they're just like, what's going on? And then they're like really entertained. They're like snickering. He has an air guitar. I don't know. My whistling abruptly changed to a funky blues rock beat, and I furiously kept pace on my invisible instrument. I jammed my way back across the kitchen, playing my guitar behind my head. This sort of thing they would have never had in It Takes a Village. I opened a higher cabinet with my nose and found some plates, which I grabbed into my mouth, unwilling to interrupt the massive riff I just launched into. The salt and pepper shaker became my screaming fans, jumping around in joy as I worked my magical claws up and down the fretboard. For the grand finale, I did another spin and positioned the plates carefully on the counter. Gotta time this right. I did a superb moonwalk back to the stove and whipped around, slamming my meaty paws down on the handles of the 3 skillets in quick succession. The food in each plate was launched high into the air, along with the peak of my music. The crowd was going absolutely nuts. I had this gig in the bag. The browns, omelette, and crepe, all perfectly cooked, flew across the kitchen, arching so high that the crepe just barely scraped the ceiling. I gave a final power chord and held one paw in the air, a single glowing claw pointing to the heavens, in a stoic salute to the gods of rock and roll. The food landed perfectly on the plates I'd set up, and the hash browns somehow arranged themselves in an artful pile. Perfect.
By Odin's chest hair, I'm just the best. I slid across the floor again, arms wide and head tilted back as my two fans brought down the house. Oh, thank you, thank you. No, you're too kind. What, an encore? Why, I suppose. What in Celestia's pearly flanks is going on in here? Shit, I was right. Yes. 20 minutes later. So then I said, oatmeal, are you crazy? The jolly stallion, who called himself Coconut, whom had walked in on the ending of my epic solo, slammed the counter with a hoof, doubled over in laughter. He was a big fellow, an earth pony, and built like a brick wall. His chocolate brown coat contrasted with his mane, a surprisingly bright blonde, cropped short enough to stand up like a zebra's mohawk. The mark on its flank, a smiley face, whisk, and a roly pin, set over each other like a skull and crossbones, symbolized his talent for cooking, as well as his knack for making a friend. Oh, my ribs! Coconut wiped a tear of laughter from his eyes. By the sun and moon, Echo! I'd never have thought one day I'd be making a breakfast fit for the princess alongside a mute diamond dog who can cook as well as I can. And he has a sense of humor. Ha ha, my boy, you've made my day. No, my month. Come here, you! He promptly wrapped a forelimb around my neck and gave me a pony version of a noogie. I vainly struggled to release myself from his iron grip, but damn it, earth ponies are strong. Air, need to breathe, I managed to scrawl. Whoops, sorry mate, got a little carried away there, don't you know? He sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck. It's just this doesn't exactly happen very often, savvy? His odd accent, a combination of what seemed to be British, American South, and Swedish. Oh shit, that's complicated. First you got the British accent, and then you got the Southern accent, and then you got the Swedish accent. It's sort of like that. Oh. It's just this doesn't happen very often, savvy? I guess I'll just go like that. I don't know. Irish-ish. Very often, savvy? Made him irresistibly forgivable, and I obliged him with a gentle pat on the head, before wrapping him in a headlock of my own and going to town on his skull. Revenge! Revenge! Admittedly, he'd been rather skeptical of me at first. A diamond dog who can write, read, cook, and play a mean air guitar? Such a thing he'd found very hard to believe. Eager to make a friend, I offered him some of my breakfast, eating the first few bites tentatively, gingerly, as if he thought I'd put something in them. Then his pupils had shrunk to pinpricks, and he'd completely abandoned his silverware in his haste to consume. Man, can this guy eat! Great googly mooglies, Batman. Can he ever? He literally inhaled my entire breakfast in one breath. It was gone. Just like that. Sorry about that. Don't rightly know what came over me. This is such confusing. I don't know. He'd mumbled through a mouthful of my breakfast after swallowing. I guess I'll just talk with an Australian accent. I don't know. Yeah. After swallowing, we'd gotten to know each other better, and I soon learned that he was the cook here at the barracks. He'd gotten up to make the rest of the guards' breakfasts, which by now he was behind schedule on. Being the gentleman I am, I volunteered my services most generously, which were surprisingly accepted. Any pony who can cook like that is all right in my book, he firmly stated. Don't care if you got wings and scales, either. We'd been understaffed in the kitchen lately, so clear off those pans and let's get cooking. And so, we'd cooked a meal fit for the halls of Asgard itself. Asgard. Where's Asgard from again? Oh, what's Asgard from? No, like, to Asgard. It's like Lord of the Rings or something. Oh, shit, it's killing me. Please comment about that, because I want to know so bad. Great, heaping piles of lightly seasoned scrambled eggs, towers of flapjacks 20 cakes high, claw-cut fruit salad that even had those silly little ornamental umbrellas, mountains of scrumptious pastries, tarts, rolls, donuts, bites, and things I had no name for. As Princess Luna might say, "'Twas a glorious feast!" Coconut deftly pried himself from my lock and staggered away, heartily laughing. Oh, you rascal! Knock that off! We got grub to serve.
And then here's a picture of them two, and his cutie mark is different, which means probably there was a different, I don't know, the pony was, the story was different or something. Whatever, continuity error. Yeah. Breakfast was served promptly at 6:30, and we had a little time left to do so. We lugged the enormous trays of food onto carts and wheeled them out into the central hall. The fact that he helped, like this, the general stuff before the main guy, not the mayor, but the main guy even, like, woke up is pretty impressive. He's gonna get extra brownie points for that, as we say at Camp Watom. Coconut retrieved some folding tables from a closet, and we commenced in setting up a cafeteria-like layout. No two tables were alike, and all in varying states of disrepair. I assumed that most of the furniture for the barracks was donated from the town itself, as the building had not yet existed long enough to order its own. Several early risers, driven from their rooms by the smell of smorgasbord sitting on the carts, coolly observed us as we worked. They made no offer to assist whatsoever, but at least they didn't give me any dirty looks. Instead, we simply regarded each other from across the hall, both sides regarding their counterpart with detached interest. "Don't mind them, Fluffy. They've never seen a diamond dog before like you." Fluffy. Coconut gave me a reassuring slap on the shoulder as I bodily lifted 4 tables at once, 2 in each claw. Unable to respond, I merely nodded and gave a small shrug. If my reception was cold now, it had been sub-zero last night. That much I was grateful for. Once all of the tables had been set up, my new friend alerted the rest of the guards to the meal simply by banging 2 pots together as loudly as he could. "Come and get it, you lazy blotters!" The pony, already in the room, efficiently formed a line by the cart and began piling on the food. A steady stream of guards spilled out from the southern wing, talking and joking amiably. The level of their volume diminished when they noticed me leaning against a pillar by the food carts alongside Coconut. I could hear a great deal of their conversations, surprisingly. My ears were quite sensitive, and in this somewhat bare hall, the noise carried well. "So, that's him, huh? Doesn't look that tough." "Right. Through the gate, I heard. Big enough to fit 2 carts across. Tithus must be off his rocker, letting him get away with that so easily. Repairs are going to be ASAP, and the captain wants to address us. Apparently he can't speak. Talks with his claws or something like that. There's been a sighting, this morning actually. I hope that hole gets patched up quick. Why does he have that hood? I can barely see his face." From what I could gather, none of them here held much against me aside from the destruction of the gate. All were interested in me, though, and once they had sat down at their chosen tables, they often shot a curious glance in my direction. Something struck me as odd, though. They weren't eating anything. Maybe it was some kind of formality, or a custom I hadn't heard of. "Good morning, every pony." That stern, yet soft voice sounded eerily clearly in my ears. I looked away from the tables to see Captain Tithus striding across the hall from the dormitory, outfitted in a silver, battered version of the Royal Unicorn Guard regalia. Gingersnap trotted gamely beside him, outfitted in a light chainmail and another variant of the guard armor, minus a helmet. Her head was held low, but her face was grim. There is no space. It's just Wasgrim. This was the first time I could see her clearly, as last night she'd been shrouded in darkness and muck. The mare was a unicorn, with a dusky cinnamon coat and a deep, dark red mane that reminded me of the color of a red velvet curtain one finds in large theater stages. She had piercing emerald eyes, and to my surprise, several thin slashes running up the side of her neck to her jaw. The mark on her flank was of a bright orange mote of fire, which I assumed had something to do with her abrasive personality, or the fact she acted like a total hothead. Her eyes met mine briefly, before she scowled and looked away. Her head held a fraction of an inch lower. Captain Tithus, however, did not notice this, or chose to ignore it. The silence was thick, as the veteran soldier made his way to the carts and piled on a truly enormous load of food, inhaling deeply from the steaming vapors they emitted. "Ah, Coconut, you've outdone yourself," he stated as he picked a place to sit at the empty table. His horn sparked to life, a golden hue that reminded me of the setting sun. Silverware magically levitated up to spare a chunk of fruit? What? Oh, spear a chunk of fruit. That's odd. He held it up to his eye, as if inspecting a freshly forged weapon. Still, no pony in the room spoke, much less made any movement. Ginger Snap tossed a few things onto a plate, held between her teeth, and sat down across from him. "Actually, sir, I had some help today," Coconut said nonchalantly. Captain Tithus lowered the morsel from his vision and cocked an eyebrow. "Do tell!" Coconut merely jerked his head in my direction, to where I was still leaning against the pillar, arms folded in front of me. Every pony in the room immediately gave me a quick look before disbelievingly examining their plates. Ginger looked as if the food was about to grow teeth and attack her. I met Tithus's gaze eventually, and was immensely glad that my hood was up. It threw my upper face into shadows, where my eyes and eyebrows were tense with worry. There was a terrible pause as he studied me, experienced eyes reading me like a book. The officer finally gave a soft grunt and popped the bite into his mouth. His eyes widened in surprise. "It's good," was all he said. The effect was immediate. The others quickly followed the example of their captain, and similar expressions of astonishment and culinary satisfaction lit up the room like a Christmas tree. Guess he's pretty popular. Only the cinnamon mare at his table denied the meal, instead choosing to examine the others' reactions first, as though she thought I'd poisoned the food somehow. It was as if someone had suddenly flicked on a switch. Conversations and chatter sprang up once again. Apparently, I had passed through the gauntlet unscathed. I felt a hoof pat me on the shoulder. "You going to eat, or just pose there all day?" Relief suddenly flooded my system, and I followed Coconut to the carts, filling up my own plate. He led me to sit at Tithus's table, and I sat as close as I could to the captain, without appearing clingy. It wasn't because I liked him, it was because of the noticeable hostility at the other end of the table. "So, you can cook," was all Tithus said. I nodded as I ate, suddenly grateful for no longer having to speak with my mouth. I could use one paw to eat, while the other maintained a full level of conversation. I take it that's rather unheard of, for my kind. "Most diamond dogs tend to eat their meals raw, preferably still moving." Oh, that's Ginger. "Most diamond dogs tend to eat their meals raw, preferably still moving," Ginger stated evenly, not looking up from where she was, still sizing up her breakfast. "I'm not most diamond dogs, am I?" I silently retorted. Those brilliant green eyes flashed, but she said nothing in reply. Coconut quickly picked up on the awkward pause. "So, Captain, what's on the schedule for today? Are we going to be marching up and down the square like usual, or do you have something interesting for the lads to do for once? And just wondering, but what are you going to do with our furry friend here?" "I've got something in mind." For some reason, I didn't like the almost chipper tone of his voice. From my experience, when a superior officer answers a question like that, it usually involves a lot of pain and suffering for his underlings. And as luck would have it, I now fell under that category. Whoop-de-frickin-do. Breakfast finished swiftly. All the guards were ravenous, and ate with a ferocity I had seen only when I lived in South Africa, and witnessed a pride of lions tear into a gazelle. A gazelle. A gazelle. A gazelle. It was a bloodless bloodbath of breakfast. A bloodless bloodbath. Jesus. A great genocide of good grub. A mammoth massacre of magnanimous morning meal. Holy shit, those are hard to do. Yeah, those are. They're even harder to pronounce. Ugh. After the carnage ended and the plates had been cleared away by a few ponies on slop duty, the captain stood at the front of the hall to address us. The guards fell silent instantly, and I was more than impressed. Tithus had only been with them a few weeks, and yet they had more discipline than I would have ever expected. The grizzled unicorn politely coughed into a hoof before speaking up, even though every pony had already fallen silent. "Right. We've got a lot of work to do today. Gate repairs are underway as I speak. However, progress is slow. Baritone, take your squad there and assist in any way the carpenters see fit. I don't care if they ask you to stand there and look pretty. Just do it. Cloud9, you are to split the Pegasi in half.
One group takes the northwest patrol, the other takes the southwest. I'll trust you to pick a competent leader for their second group. After you finish your route, gather 3 clicks past the nest and proceed back to town due east. I want a solid report on how many eggs have hatched. If you have to get close, do it. This knowledge could save lives. Sparky! Sparky, where are you? Ah! Hiding in the back again. You're to take another squad down to the depot today. I need you to stockpile all the fireworks for the Summer Suns Festival here in the hall. Put up a barricade so no pony ends up blowing up the place. Any pony that I haven't mentioned, or isn't picked by the squad leaders, is to spend the day on rampart patrol. Keep an eye out for the little ones. They started coating themselves in mud for camouflage. Ginger, Snap, and Echo, remain here. That is all. Hop to it, ponies.
Coconut gave me a reassuring glance as he rose from the table, galloping off with the rest of the guards back into the dormitory wing. I assumed they were going to get their gear on, and then move out with all due haste. That just left me, the captain, and Ginger.
Now then, began the officer, I've got a plan that may be able to take care of the Hydras once and for all. The only problem is, it requires 2 ponies to pull it off correctly, and the only 2 here are capable for the job are you 2.
Ginger Snap visibly stiffened, and I could see her jaw clamp down hard. What did she have against me? Oh, I bet her parents died. Someone in her family. Totally. I call it. It's personal, whatever it is.
No pony else I had seen this far treated me with such dislike and hostility. We've been fighting the Hydras the wrong way, Echo. For weeks we've been singling them out, picking them off. It isn't working. But now that you're here, we can finally change our approach.
Ginger stifled a grimace before speaking up. What would you have us do, sir?
It's not what you'll be doing that's so important. It's what you'll be.
I frowned from under my hoof. This didn't sound very good for me. And what exactly are we to become? He smiled.
Bait!
End of chapter 9. And it's got 6,666 views. Whoa! I'm the 6,666th viewer. I'm going to comment that right now. So, Pyro, what do you think? How is my Australian accent? Insulting. How is it insulting? How can it be good and insulting? That doesn't make sense. Because I did it. It's insulting that I know that about Australians. Or at least their accent or something. I'm that bad that if I just know about something, it's insulting. Thanks, I love you too, Pyro. What?